What does it mean to be brave? Not the kind of brave they put on war memorials or give medals for. The quiet kind. The kind where you're standing in a parking garage at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, your feet hurting from a double shift. And you hear something you weren't supposed to hear. And you have to decide, in about 3 seconds, whether you're the kind of person who keeps walking or the kind who doesn't. Nessa Holt had always assumed she was the first kind. She'd spent most of her 28 years being careful. Careful with money, careful with trust, careful with the fragile architecture of a life built on not enough. She worked days at St. Brennan's Medical Center in Halifax, Nova Scotia, as an emergency room technician, not a nurse, not yet, though she was 2 semesters away from finishing her degree at night. And she picked up weekend shifts at a hotel bar downtown because her younger brother Kieran's dialysis didn't pay for itself, and their mother's pension covered approximately nothing. She was tired in the specific way that people who carry too much for too long get tired. The kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and doesn't leave after sleep. That Tuesday in November, she was cutting through the parkade on Barrington Street because it was raining. The particular Halifax rain that feels personal, like the sky has decided to make something difficult for you specifically, and her bus was in 4 minutes, and she had exactly enough energy left to make it home, heat up whatever was in the fridge, and collapse. She was almost at the stairwell when she heard it. Not a fight. She'd heard fights before. This was different, methodical, controlled, the sound of something being done, rather than something breaking out, voices, low and deliberate. Then a grunt of pain, then silence where the sound of breathing should have been. She stopped walking. Every sensible part of her brain said, keep going. You have a bus to catch. You have a brother at home. You have exactly $32 in your account until Friday. You cannot afford to be involved in whatever that is. She turned left instead of right. The man was on the ground near the concrete pillar at the far end of level 2, in the shadow between 2 SUVs. He was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than Nessa's monthly rent. He was also bleeding from a cut above his eye and from what looked like a hit to the ribs, and his breathing was shallow and wrong. 2 men stood over him, both in black. One was still holding what he'd hit him with. They looked up when they heard her footsteps. "Hey," Nessa said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "What's happening here?" It wasn't a question. That surprised her, even then. She'd meant it to be a question. One of the men said something to the other in a language she didn't catch. The other looked at her the way people look at an inconvenience, briefly, dismissively, as if assessing whether she was worth the additional effort. "Walk away," the first one said. His English was accented Eastern European, she thought. "You didn't see anything. He needs medical attention," Nessa said. She was already calculating airway, circulation, the angle of his arm against the ground. The ER part of her brain just turning on like a switch whether she wanted it to or not. If he doesn't get it in the next few minutes, he's going to have a real problem. "That is not your concern. I'm a medical professional." It kind of is. She had no idea where she found that. She stood there in her wet hospital scrubs and her rain jacket with the broken zipper and her bus pass still in her hand, and she said it like she meant it, because maybe she did. The 2 men looked at each other. Something passed between them, assessment, calculation, and then the first one stepped back and said to his companion, "Leave it." And then to Nessa, with the particular coldness of someone who doesn't need to threaten because the threat is implied, "This is a mistake." They left. She didn't watch them go. She was already crouching next to the man on the ground. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair, sharp-featured, the kind of face that was probably striking under normal circumstances, and was currently just pale. He had a tattoo curling up from the collar of his shirt. His eyes were open, watching her. "Can you tell me where the pain is?" she asked. "My ribs," he said. His voice was low and careful. "Maybe one cracked. Not broken. You'd know the difference, unfortunately." "Yes." She worked quickly, checking his pupils, his pulse, running fingers along his ribcage the way she'd been trained to. He didn't make a sound, but she felt him tense once, sharply, when she reached the 3rd rib on the left side. "That one's at least cracked," she said. "You need imaging. No hospital." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "You understand what I just said?" "I do." His eyes met hers. They were dark, very direct, the kind of eyes that were used to being listened to. "No hospital. I have people I can call. Then call them." She handed him his phone, which had fallen a few feet away. He took it without looking away from her. "You're going to leave now," he said. It wasn't a question either. "Yes," she said. "I'm going to miss my bus. What's your name?" She picked up her bag from where she'd dropped it. "Nessa." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Thank you, Nessa." She walked to the stairwell, pushed through the door, and stood in the fluorescent light of the concrete staircase for about 15 seconds, hands shaking now that she was alone, because apparently her body had been saving that for when it wouldn't be useful. Then she went down the stairs and out into the rain and missed her bus by 45 seconds. She told herself it was over. People in Halifax did not generally get beaten up in downtown parkades by men who said this is a mistake in that particular tone of voice, unless they were involved in something that had nothing to do with Nessa Holt. Whatever it wasn't her world. She'd helped a man who needed help. That was it. She went back to St. Brennan's. She picked up Kieran from his Wednesday treatment and made pasta and listened to him talk about a girl in his program he liked. She studied for her pharmacology exam on Thursday evening while the rain started again outside. On Friday morning, a black car was parked across the street from her building. She noticed it because it was a very expensive car in a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of expensive cars, and because it was there when she left at 6:30 and still there when her neighbor texted her a photo at noon, asking if she was expecting someone. She almost called the police. She picked up her phone twice to do it. She didn't. At 4 o'clock, someone knocked on her door. The man in the hall was not one of the men from the parkade. He was older, with silver at his temples and a very precise suit, and he had the manner of someone who'd spent his entire life as the intermediate step between someone important and everyone else. "Miss Holt," he said, "my employer would like to speak with you. Who is your employer? He'd prefer to introduce himself." She stared at this man for a moment. "Tell your employer," she said, "that if he wants to talk to me, he can knock on my door himself, or call, like a person." The man blinked. She got the impression he wasn't blinked at often. He said he would convey the message. 20 minutes later, another knock. The man from the parkade. He looked considerably better than he had 4 nights ago. The cut above his eye was closed and clean, and he was wearing a different suit, charcoal, with a white shirt open at the collar, and he was standing very straight, which suggested the cracked rib was either treated or being ignored through sheer force of will. "Nessa Holt," he said. "You looked me up, I did. It wasn't difficult. You gave me your first name and you're the only ear technician in Halifax with a bus pass registered to this address." A pause. "I'm thorough. That's one word for it." He looked at her steadily. "My name is Rafferty Strand." She'd heard the name. Not in her world exactly, but in the ambient awareness you develop living in a city. The kind of name that appeared in business sections and occasionally in articles that stopped just short of saying certain things directly. "Come in," she said, because the alternative was having this conversation in the hallway and she'd rather be on her own turf. He came in. He stood in her small living room and looked at the stacks of nursing textbooks on the table and the whiteboard she used for memorizing drug interactions and Kieran's medication schedule pinned to the fridge, and his expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind his eyes shifted. "I want to compensate you," he said, "for what you did. I don't want compensation. Miss Holt, I'm serious." She crossed her arms. "I stopped because someone was hurt. That's it. I don't want your money." He studied her. "Most people would. I'm not most people. And honestly, if you're who I think you are, I'd rather not have anything you're handing out." There was a silence, then something she did not expect, a sound at the corner of his mouth that was almost, not quite, a dry laugh. "Fair," he said. She thought that would be the end of it. She thought he would leave, and the black car would disappear, and she could go back to being the person who didn't get involved. "Your brother," Rafferty said, "is on the Halifax health wait list." She went very still. 31 months estimated, he said, not unkindly. "He's been waiting 8. He's 24. That's a long time." "Don't," she said quietly. "I'm not threatening you." His voice was even. "Careful. I'm telling you what I know. And I'm telling you that I have people who can accelerate certain administrative processes, legitimately, through proper channels. Nothing you do goes through proper channels. You'd be surprised." He looked at her. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm telling you that what you did cost you your bus and cost me a great deal more, and the fact that you're standing there telling me to keep my money is either the most principled thing I've encountered this year or the most stubborn. Possibly both." Nessa said nothing. "I'll leave," he said. "I won't contact you again if you don't want me to." He set a card on the corner of her bookshelf. "Plain white, just a number. But if you change your mind about the help, for your brother, not for you, call." He left. She stood in her living room for a long time after. She didn't call. Not that week. The problem with principles is that they're easy to hold when the stakes are abstract. They get heavier when your brother calls you from the dialysis center, sounding exhausted in a way that's deeper than tired. When the numbers on the waitlist don't move. When you're in your second hour of studying kidney disease pathology for an exam that will help you help people someday. Just not the specific person you most need to help right now. She called on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after he'd come to her apartment. He answered on the second ring. "Nessa," he said, as if he'd been expecting it. "I'm not asking for the waitlist thing," she said. I thought about it. I can't. I don't want Kieran's health tied to whatever it is you do. She paused. But I need a different kind of help, and I don't know who else to ask. There was a pause on his end. Tell me. The building she managed, a small rental property their mother owned, the one asset she'd held on to, the one thing between their family and nothing, was being pressured. Had been pressured for 2 years, quietly, by a development group that wanted the lot. Their mother had refused. Last week, a bylaw violation had appeared from nowhere. Then an inspection. Then a letter from a lawyer Nessa had never heard of citing a municipal regulation that seemed to have been written specifically for this situation. It's not legal, Nessa said. What they're doing. But I can't prove it, and I can't afford the kind of lawyer who could. Silence on the other end. Then, send me the documents. I know what you're not doing, he said. Send me the documents. I'll look at them. If there's something illegal happening, I'll find a way to surface it that doesn't involve you or your mother owing me anything. She sent the documents. He called back in 18 hours. The bylaw violation was filed by a city clerk whose brother-in-law works for the development company, he said. The lawyer who sent the letter is the same firm they've used for 3 other forced acquisitions in the past 4 years. 2 of those were challenged and settled quietly. The third went to the property owner, who had better legal counsel. How did you find all of that? I'm thorough, he said, the same word he'd used before, and she heard something behind it this time, a faint thread of something that was almost amusement, almost warmth. I know someone at the city, and someone at that law firm. I can make a call. A legitimate call, the kind that suggests someone might want to review their conduct before it becomes a regulatory matter. The pressure on their building stopped. Not immediately, but within 6 weeks the violations were withdrawn, the lawyer's letters ceased, and the development company quietly shifted their attention to a different lot 3 streets away. Her mother cried on the phone, not out of gratitude, exactly, out of relief, the particular relief of someone who had been braced for something terrible for so long that its absence felt physical. Nessa called Rafferty to tell him. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. A pause. How's your brother? The same. She hesitated. How's your rib? Another pause, longer this time. Healed, he said, and then quietly, Nessa, have dinner with me. She almost said no. She ran through all the reasons to say no. The list was long and well organized and made complete sense. Why? She asked instead. Because I'd like to talk to you, he said, when neither of us is bleeding or being rained on. She laughed. She hadn't meant to. That's a low bar. I'm working with what I have. The restaurant he chose was not what she'd expected. She'd expected somewhere designed to impress. Marble, low lighting, the kind of place that doesn't put prices on the menu. Instead, it was a small Italian place on the south end, 15 tables, checked tablecloths, the kind of place that had been there since before she was born. The owner knew him by name and greeted him in Italian and didn't make a production of it. Rafferty Strand in a not impressive restaurant was, she found, more difficult to manage than Rafferty Strand in crisis or Rafferty Strand on the phone. In person, without the emergency, she had to look at him properly. He had the particular quality of someone who was always slightly more attentive than you expected. He listened the way few people did, without preparing his next sentence. She told him about nursing school, about why she'd chosen R first, because emergencies were what she understood, the clarity of them, the way every second had a purpose. He asked questions that were specific, not polite. He told her, carefully, not everything, but enough, that he'd built what he had from almost nothing, that it had required methods he was not proud of, that he operated now in a city that understood what he was and worked with him anyway, because the alternative was more disorderly. You could have kept walking, he said at some point about the parkade. Most people would have. You mentioned. I keep thinking about it. He turned his glass in his hands. I have a number of people who are paid to be loyal to me, and a woman I'd never met turned around in a parking garage in the rain because I was hurt. He looked at her. That's not a small thing. It's a normal thing, Nessa said. It should be. Maybe. He didn't look convinced. But it isn't. She understood what he was saying. She'd thought about it too, in the weeks since. Not just what she'd done, but why she'd kept engaging, kept answering when he called, kept saying yes to one more thing. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It wasn't the help he'd given, though she was honest enough to admit that mattered. It was something she'd recognized in him that night on the concrete floor of the parkade. Someone who was very good at being alone and not certain, anymore, that it was the arrangement they preferred. She recognized it because it was hers too. They stayed until the restaurant was almost empty. He drove her home, parked on her street, didn't move to get out of the car, which she appreciated, the absence of assumption. I want to be honest with you about something, he said. Okay, the people who were in that parkade, they work for a man I've been in conflict with for 2 years. His name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that the situation is not resolved, and being connected to me has a risk profile that I can't pretend doesn't exist. He looked at her. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know it, and because you're going to find out anyway, because you're the kind of person who looks things up. She was, in fact, that kind of person. I'm not asking you to be involved in that, he said. I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner again, and I'm telling you the honest shape of what that involves. She was quiet for a moment. The man from that night, she said. He doesn't know who you are, Rafferty said, and I intend to keep it that way. But you can't guarantee it. No, he said. I can't. She looked at him in the dark of the car. The streetlight came through the window and caught the line of his jaw, the particular steadiness of him. She thought about Kieran. She thought about her mother. She thought about the $32 in her account that had been replaced, slowly by something more stable, and about the life she was building one exam at a time, and about whether that life had room for someone like this. Same restaurant? She said. Next Thursday? Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, almost a smile, same restaurant. The next 2 months were not simple. The man Rafferty had mentioned, she looked him up, of course she did, was a figure named Gregor Aldman, who operated across the Atlantic provinces and had, in the past 3 years, made several strategic moves that had put him in direct competition with Rafferty's operations. She found 3 news articles that approached the topic without quite addressing it, and 1 business filing that raised more questions than it answered. She did not tell Rafferty she'd looked this up. She suspected he knew. What she noticed, in the dinners and the phone calls, and the one Saturday afternoon he spent at her kitchen table, going through building code documents for a property dispute a colleague of his was navigating. What she noticed was the quality of his attention. He did not pretend the world was simpler than it was. He did not manage her. He told her when something was dangerous, and he told her when he didn't know the answer, and he said once quietly that the way she moved through the ER, he'd seen her there once, picking Kieran up, was the most purposeful thing he'd ever watched. She didn't know what to do with that. She knew what she was doing with it. She just didn't have a word for it yet. In March, things got complicated. Gregor Aldman made a move, not against Rafferty directly, but against someone who worked with him. A logistics manager named Brecker, whose family had been in Halifax for generations, and who had, apparently, made a quiet arrangement with Aldman without telling Rafferty. The arrangement came to light badly. There was a confrontation. Nessa heard about it second-hand, then third-hand, then from Rafferty himself, who called her at 11:30 at night, sounding like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Brecker was with me for 9 years, he said. Are you safe? Yes. A beat. I don't. I'm telling you this because I don't have anyone else I tell things to. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. Tell me. He did. Not everything, still not everything, but the shape of it. The betrayal, the cost, the recalibration required. She didn't offer him solutions. She didn't have any. She just listened, the way she'd learned to listen in the ER. Present, steady, not trying to fix what she couldn't fix. At some point he said, I keep thinking about what you said. That stopping to help someone should be normal. It should. Most people in my position stopped expecting that years ago. I know, she said. That's the problem with your position. He was quiet for a long time. Get some sleep, she said finally. Things look different after sleep. Usually not better, but different. She heard him almost laugh. The Brecker situation resolved. Not cleanly. These things never did, but enough. And what came out of it, unexpectedly, was that one of the logistics routes Brecker had compromised was one Rafferty hadn't been able to protect. And Nessa, who had been listening to him talk about it for 2 months, and who had a particular talent for systems, medication schedules, supply chains, shift patterns, had drawn something on a napkin at the Italian restaurant that turned out to be correct. He'd stared at it. You drew the problem, he said. I mapped what you told me. The solution is obvious once you see where the gap is, she said. Someone's not talking to someone else in your chain, and everything's routing around it instead of through it. She shrugged. It's the same thing that happens in trauma care, the handoff problem. He looked at her for a long time across the table. Don't, she said. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking about offering me, don't. I'm thinking, he said very carefully, that you're remarkable. That's all. She looked at him. The restaurant was warm. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone was arguing amiably in Italian. Rafferty, she said. Nessa. I'm going to finish my degree, she said. I'm going to be a nurse practitioner and then probably a doctor. That's the plan. That's been the plan for 6 years. I know, he said. I'm telling you so you're clear. I'm clear. He didn't look away. That plan sounds exactly like you. She picked up her fork. Same restaurant next week, she said. It wasn't a question anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The Aldman situation ended in April. Not with a confrontation, but with a legal filing that Nessa would never fully understand, that seemed to have involved 3 separate regulatory bodies and a very quiet conversation between Rafferty and someone at the provincial level that she elected not to ask about. The pressure dissolved the way the pressure on her mother's building had dissolved. Not dramatically, just a problem that was there, and then, carefully, wasn't. Rafferty came by her apartment on a Tuesday evening and told her. She was studying. He sat on her couch and waited while she finished the section she was on, which she appreciated in a way she couldn't quite articulate, the patience of it, the willingness to exist in her life without demanding that she stop being it. When she closed the textbook, she looked at him. "You're relieved," she said. "Yes. Are you going to tell me how it resolved?" "Some of it." His mouth twitched. "The parts that won't concern you." "And the parts that would concern me." I handled. She studied him. He looked tired, but not the bad kind of tired. The kind that came after something hard was over. "Kieran's number moved," she said, "on the wait list. Last week." He looked at her carefully. "I'm not." "I looked at the circumstances," she said. "I can't find anything that ties it to you." "It doesn't," he said simply. She held his gaze. "It doesn't," he said again. "I told you I wouldn't." She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not about him, not about any of this. She believed him. She'd spent 28 years being careful about whom she trusted, which was to say almost no one, which was to say she'd constructed her life to not require trust from anyone she couldn't verify 6 ways. And here she was. "I'm still going to be a doctor." She looked at him steadily. "And you're still going to be. Whatever you are, and I'm not interested in pretending either of those things is different." "I know," he said. "I'm also not interested in walking away." He was quiet for a moment, then very quietly, "Neither am I." Outside, the Halifax harbour was doing what it always did. Grey and indifferent and larger than anything you expected. The streetlights came on. Somewhere a few blocks over, a bus made its stop. Nessa Holt had been exactly on time for that bus once. She'd been careful and correct, and it had been the most sensible thing. She didn't regret turning left instead.